Take a look at the big news coming from Capitol Hill today.
Weiner.
We're waiting for Anthony Weiner to walk through that door, go up to the microphones, and announce that he is resigning from the U.S. House of Representatives.
This is Congressman Anthony Weiner about to announce his resignation. Let's listen in.
So today I'm announcing my resignation from Congress.
So there you have it. He spoke for almost exactly 4 minutes.
Boy, a lot of anger in that room. Did you hear the heckling?
Are there seeds of a potential Anthony Weiner comeback in that?
Believe it or not, Weiner's resignation is not the most important news you need to know coming from the nation's capital. As the United States continues its military intervention in Libya, the two branches of government are now battling it out as a result. 10 members of Congress are suing the president in an attempt to end U.S. involvement in Libya for failing to get congressional approval. The White House, for its part, claims it is not in violation of the law because it's not actually at war, but is operating in a support role. First, I kind of want to look at that. I want to throw up a graphic so you can decide what you think the U.S. involvement has been in Libya. Take a look. So those are all the U.S. resources when you think about planes and ships and flights. And now look at, compared to another NATO ally like the U.K. Quite a difference. Look at it next to France. Again, quite a difference. This, is not exactly up to today's date, but it represents the first couple months of this military intervention. You can decide what kind of a role you think the United States has had, how significant it is and has been. But here to talk a little bit more about it and to analyze really the legality of this all and how significant this all is David Swanson. He is author of this book, War is a Lie. You can see it right there. And he joins us now. Thank you, David, for being here. Now, this lawsuit from these 10 members of Congress, I want to mention, too, that it's bipartisan. It has Republicans and Democrats, Democrats like Dennis Kucinich, Republicans like Ron Paul. Now, they argue that the president is in violation of the law and the Constitution and that they're attempting to end the military intervention. I know that you are one who also argues that this war is illegal. The White House says otherwise. Prove the White House wrong.
Well, the White House doesn't make the arguments that many of its supporters make. The argument it made in its report to Congress yesterday was that the War Powers Act does not apply, much less the Constitution, because this is neither a war nor hostilities. This is something else. This is a military operation that doesn't rise to the level of hostilities, which is absolutely absurd. The War Powers Act was written in 1973 very intentionally and clearly to encompass all military engagements, including imminent threats of hostilities and anything amounting to hostilities. And so there was a program yesterday when Congressman Dennis Kucinich, or maybe it was this morning, Congressman Dennis Kucinich was debating a former lawyer from the Reagan White House who was defending Obama, and he asked this guy twice, never got an answer, if there were 2,000 missions over the United States by a foreign nation and many of them were dropping bombs, would that be war? Would that be hostilities?
Right. Well, that's something I want to ask you, David, because even if, you say that it doesn't even matter what the U.S.'s engagement is, that this would be illegal. But what about their argument that the U.S. is in a support role and that they're not engaged in hostilities? Aren't drones striking Libya still? Is that not hostilities?
They are, and the president's report yesterday admitted that in sort of a parenthetical remark. But the War Powers Act, I have more and more respect for this law. It was written in 1973, and it specifically says this includes hostilities and military operations where the United States is a partner with other nations and acting in this sort of a role. It's in there. Read that law. To argue that it doesn't apply for reasons that the crafters of that law had the foresight to anticipate is just crazy.
President Obama, didn't he teach constitutional law? What do you think, he's really thinking here?
Well, he's thinking that he's the president and he wants to get away with what he can get away with. He could have gotten Congress to authorize war in Libya. It would have been quite easily done. He could have done it in the 60-day gap after he started the war. He chose not to. There's an intention here to enlarge presidential powers, to strip away congressional powers. And that's even down in writing in an amendment that's sitting in the Senate or in a section of the Defense Authorization Act of 2012 that's sitting in the Senate like dozens of ticking time bombs of future wars waiting to become law. Presidents want, and this president is no exception, the power to make wars on their own.
So then why not more than 10 members of Congress that are really calling him on this in a dramatic way?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think there should be the full body. But, you know, in other efforts in recent weeks, passing amendments denying funding in particular bills, denying U.S. ground troops, expressing their concerns and so forth, there have been huge numbers, majorities in the House of Representatives. But I think it would be plausible for the court to reply in this case. Congress can cut off the funding if it chooses. Congress can impeach if it chooses. That's not happened.
That's an interesting point. I want to talk about the money because the White House admits that it is spending quite a bit, that this has cost the Pentagon more than $700 million and is expected to cost $1.1 billion by September. But this is existing money from the DOD budget. Can Congress block that? I'm just curious. It sounds like you're saying they are. And okay, even if the White House is making this argument that they're not violating War Powers Act because the U.S. isn't really at war, whatever you think of that, does the White House need to go to Congress when it's spending this kind of money when government spending is such a huge issue right now?
One would think so. One would hope so. That the court case is dramatically strengthened by the fact that Congress has not appropriated a dime for war making in Libya. That helps tremendously because the court could easily argue that having appropriated funding, Congress has thereby approved of the war. What Congress may do if the Senate goes along with the House is pass bills denying the use of any money from those particular bills, including the defense budget bills for the coming year for a war in Libya. The fact is the president is going around that and taking the money from the incredible slush fund in the Pentagon and the CIA and the secret budgets and Bush's innovation, allowing the presidents to transfer money secretly to secret budgets. This is out of control. What Congress could do in response would be to pass a bill through both houses denying permission to use any money from any source in a war in Libya. It could do that. It could do that tomorrow. And that's not on the agenda. It should be.
So it kind of shows the real political will maybe more broadly, because I understand even when Clinton violated the War Powers Act in Kosovo, he went to Congress to at least get funding approved, which is then seen as at least going to Congress at that 60-day mark. I thought it was interesting, switching gears a little bit, that I was reading one of your latest writings, and you mentioned that a college student, when you were speaking, asked if you were being extreme to call this war illegal. And the point you made was that, you know, illegal isn't some, you know, ideological statement. You're talking about the law here. I'm curious what you think that says about the way the public now sees U.S. wars, the U.S., of course, being in a constant state of war now for 10 years.
Yeah, it's somehow impolite or radical to talk about wars as illegal, when that ought to be a more clear-cut question than whether a war is moral or desirable. Of course, we have a majority opposing our current wars in this country with no response out of Congress that's appropriate. But these wars are blatantly illegal, and the war in Libya is the most glaringly illegal war we've ever seen. Outdoes Clinton by far. You know, Clinton at least had the money. Clinton didn't violate the 60-day limit and so forth. This is intentionally going around Congress and avoiding any appearance whatsoever of getting authorization from Congress. That's the intention here. And so the offense is intentional illegality.
But do you think that the government and the public don't really care anymore when it comes to laws and war?
I think the polling is somewhat mixed. I think there are indications that the public does care. I think that there are progressive Democrats in Congress who care, and libertarian Republicans in Congress who care, and a good bunch of Republicans in Congress who hate Obama more than they hate peace and justice who care.
Okay.
And that coalition is making things possible that no one would have imagined a couple months back.
Okay, real quickly, a group of 25 U.S. senators, almost all Democrats, but a couple Tea Party Republicans, they sent a letter to Obama urging him to have a sizable reduction of U.S. troop forces in July in Afghanistan. Do you see this as significant, and do you think it carries any weight?
I certainly hope so, and so I don't want to talk it down, but it's not an action. It's an appeal to a higher authority from our first branch of government to its executive. It's an inversion of how our government ought to operate. You know, kids can write letters to the president. Senators can begin and end wars, and that's what they ought to be doing.
Right, but yet we see this, kind of these token moves. I'm curious, just yes or no, if you see these as more token moves or actually effective instruments.
Well, it certainly cannot hurt for senators and Congress members to be talking about their opposition to the war in Afghanistan. But there has been a concerted effort by the leadership of both parties in both sides of Congress to avoid taking any action on Afghanistan. And that is a problem that cannot be addressed by elections when this promise arose since an election and will be broken prior to an election. We need a withdrawal next month, and Congress is not forcing that to happen.
Sounds like it can't happen with a letter either. That was David Swanson. Thanks so much for your analysis. He's author of War is a Lie.